What's up fam, my name is Tech and welcome to my Mass Effect 3 multiplayer guide for the Quarian engineer. In this guide, I'll be starting by going over the racial passives and then the active abilities. Following that, I'll give you a build you can try to start off with the class. And as always, links to useful information will be in the description. So what's the Quarian engineer good for? This class can be either an effective support or a solid damage dealer with a focus on armor or health. The base Quarians are both slightly more durable than average. They have the default 500 health and a bit extra shields at 600. Their movement and melee is all the standard stuff except they have the side hop instead of the roll. Their fitness tree is identical to the human one, and the Quarian defender tree is pretty much the same as Alliance training. The only real difference is you have a slight focus on power damage boosts. Now onto the active abilities. Your first ability is Sentry Turret. On activation, you'll throw a grenade-like projectile that spawns a turret on contact. It can be spec'd with a few different useful effects. You can add a close-range shock attack that can be useful to stun enemies and choke points. You can also give it either cryo or armor-piercing ammo. The cryo is good for completely freezing and priming red bar enemies, and while I haven't personally tested it, I've read that armor-piercing ammo is bugged to increase damage on red bars as well as armored ones. And lastly, you can give it either a short-range flamethrower or a long-range rocket. Both are solid choices, each with their own pros. If you run Flamethrower, you want to put it as near enemies as possible and will deal high damage to armor while priming for fire combos. If you run Rockets, you want the turret further away where it has good sightlines. The Rockets will have less overall DPS than the Flamethrower, but it's still decent, plus the Rockets can stagger infantry. Depending on which perks you pick, the turret will randomly cycle through its attacks depending on the target's distance. This means that none of the perk choices override any of the others. But do keep in mind if you pick Shock and Flamethrower, it'll cycle through them randomly, which can make it awkward. This ability can be a good complement to your other ones, and it's one of only 3 abilities that can prime for 2 different types of combos, and it's the only one that can prime for both in the same match. Your next ability is Incinerate. I went over this in pretty good detail on my Human Engineer video, so I'll be doing a TLDR here. Incinerate is the main offensive ability for this class. On activation, you launch an arcing projectile that deals fire damage on contact and some damage over time. It's most effective on yellow and red bars, and even panics some enemies, which can give decent CC in addition to its damage. It detonates all but biotic combos and primes single targets. It can even prime multiple with certain perks. But since this is your main detonator with this class, priming for multiple targets is not as much of a priority here. With this class, you can take good advantage of the freeze combo damage perk, so definitely take that. Your last ability is Cryoblast. It doesn't deal any damage on its own, but it completely immobilizes unprotected enemies while slowing protected ones. It also weakens armor and stops health regeneration if the target has it. Its perk choices are pretty well balanced. At rank 4, you can get Duration or Radius, essentially a choice between hitting one target longer or multiple targets. Rank 5, you can choose between Freeze Explosion or Speed Reduction. The former gives you more damage to affected targets, while the latter makes slow targets like brutes never able to catch you. The rank 6 perk is pretty clear though. The base cooldown of the ability is very low by default, so recharge speed is not needed. Frozen Vulnerability on the other hand is pretty good, increasing damage on chilled targets and even more on armored targets. On its own, it's a pretty average or below ability, but it's a very good complement to this class. So how do you build the class? I think it has a few viable builds. The first one would be a more supportive build. Max out Sentry Turret, taking shields and damage, cryo ammo, and rockets. This gives you some solid CC and okay damage at most ranges. Then max out Incinerate, taking damage, recharge speed, and freeze combo. And lastly, max out Cryoblast with Radius, Cryo Explosion, and Frozen Vulnerability. With this build, your focus is freezing and staggering enemies. You can also run a variant of this build that has a bit higher damage potential if you run armor-piercing ammo and flamethrower instead. Using those, you can also possibly get fire combos. The second build I would recommend is a pure combo build. For this, I would pick all the same perks in Incinerate and Cryoblast, but I would skip Sentry Turret. The trade-off is that you get higher base damage on Incinerate with the extra passive power boost, plus a bit more durability from the points in fitness. I would choose to run this if you prefer not to run Sentry Turret because you don't like managing it, or if you think it dies too quickly on Gold Plus. This class prefers to run SMGs and heavy pistols as you'll want your weapon weight as low as possible. As such, you should try using the Expert package or the Omni Capacitors for your gear bonus. Because you can't freeze targets with barriers or shields, those are your biggest weakness. To help with that, consider running an Acolyte or Disruptor rounds. You can also benefit from Cryo or Incendiary rounds, which will prime for you to detonate with Incinerate. This class can be in a weird place against some factions. It's pretty good against Geth and Reapers, but a few things can give you some grief. Reapers clump a lot, and many of them have armor which you like, but Banshees have strong barriers and can be very deadly to you. Geth are also easily funneled and slow with lots of armor, but most of them have shields. I think the best class to pair with this one is one that can strip shields and barriers well. With that being said, one of my next guides will be the Turian Sentinel, so keep a lookout for that. If you like this video, please drop a like so the YouTube algorithm lets other people know this game is still being played, and if you want to continue learning this game with me, I'll be making more of these guides in the future. Later fam.